Coming up on today's show, born on Lesbos, Greece, Eurydice is a writer, artist, activist, archivist, scholar, and advocate for sexual healing. She is the author of Satiricon USA and F32, The Second Coming. She's the host and creator of the Speak Sex with Eve podcast. Eurydice's art has been featured in numerous shows in Europe and the United States. Her art practice connects her to hundreds of generations of silenced women for whom she speaks. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Shambliss. Coming up after the break, my conversation with Eurydice. The Loving Without Boundaries podcast is proudly brought to you by altplayground.net. So Alt Playground announced in September earlier of this year the acquisition of Love Voodoo. You might be wondering, well, what does that mean for me? Well, let me tell you. What that means is that now 500,000 former Love Voodoo members, that's over 500,000 people, have been granted trial memberships with Alt Playground. So what that means is that Alt Playground is working hard to bring lifestylers and non-monogamous people together in one convenient, fun place so that like-minded people like you can meet each other. This means even more sexy people for you to connect with across the entire United States as we build out this community of people who are sex positive, just like you. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am super excited to be here with Eve Eurydice, whom I'm making the lovely acquaintance of today. We're getting to know each other. And Eve, I did share your bio with everyone, but I'd love it if you could just introduce us and tell us a little bit about yourself in your own words for our listeners.
Okay. Thank you for having me, Kitty. I am Greek from the island of Lesbos, where the lesbians came from. So that was kind of like my first, the beginning, I think, of my understanding that sex was a big issue that I had to think about. And Speak Sex with Eve is the name of my podcast. Mm-hmm. Speaking Sex came basically from that because I was a lesbian with a capital A, and I moved to Athens to go to school, and I, quickly found out that I shouldn't say that it was a dirty word and I would be judged, and I didn't know what it meant. Mm-hmm. So like before I had the sexuality, I had the sexual shame, of some identity, right? Mm. So that kind of like was the beginning of that consciousness. So I'm an academic, I'm a scholar, I'm a writer. I write about sexuality. I've published 3 books. I'm working on a Speak Sex book right now. And I'm also an artist. I kind of like use embroidery and stitch both to like honor my, women ancestors whose art is like discredited, but also to kind of take time with words and thinking and not rush, it's kind of like an art of resistance for me. Mm-hmm. So that's my work, speaksexpodcast.com or eurydice.net.
Beautiful. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background. So you were born in Greece?
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. And so I love how you are just so open and you love to speak about sex. I often joke around that partly the reason I have a podcast is because I always wanted to talk about sex when I was younger and no one seemed to want to talk about it. So I created a whole podcast around the ability to do that. So I always felt like I was beating to the drum of, a different player. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your light bulb moment. Like when you were younger, you mentioned that some different things about how you felt a little bit different. Like tell me a little bit more about how you knew you were kind of going to march to the beat of a different drummer when you were younger for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, I always, I mean, I was always different in the sense that I had a great facility with language, and I quickly discovered that I would be allowed a break from the destiny of my biological gender through that gift. I taught myself to read super young, and then my dad would like show me off to his friends, and my dad worked for the ministry in Athens. That was like during a junta actually, and he would like take me to the symposiums and dinners and have me recite Homer. And so to the minister. So I kind of learned that I had that, and that was my way out of like being told whom to marry and, being a breeder, like my mother, my grandma, and my great grandma, and all of that. But at some stage when I became a teenager, my becoming a sexual being, quickly like brought me back into the original destiny, and so, I rebelled. I didn't work out. I was not allowed to be like a boy. And I ran away and came to America. I actually went to Hollywood, LA. Ended up graduating from Redondo Union High School. And, it's been a kind of consistent rebellion since. I've been very conscious of the restrictions and the norm and how it doesn't, speak for most of us. And every time I find myself like normalized, I get out of that.
That's fascinating. I love how your journey just went so many different places, and how interesting that you were, reciting Homer. And I loved how you said that it got you out of a way out of the breeding, kind of like the traditional path is kind of how I took that to mean, just the usual path. I love that. So how did that impact maybe some of your early relationships when you just kind of realized that you were this kind of sexual being and just different from other people?
Yeah, well, I didn't really have relationships until I came to America. In Greece, I was so paranoid that a relationship would put me in the place of like a girl, a woman would rob me of all power, that I just wouldn't do it. And then when I came to America, I went to see, I remember, Rocky Horror Picture Show, like within a week or two of being here. And it was like I was on another planet. And so definitely, like sex here was not the same as in the old world. And, it was like in the heart of the post-sexual revolution, like, riot girl, whatever, guerrilla girl culture. So I still avoided intimate long-term relationships and just, explored sexuality. But it took me a very long time to, find a way to get into intimacy of the partnership type without that fear of being, dominated or owned or kind of like turning into my mother unconsciously. So it's not about the partner and what my partner does so much as what I would do, just because of the role modeling, the social conditioning I had received.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm totally curious, when was it that you saw Rocky Horror Picture Show? Like, how old were you when you first saw it?
It was in LA, in Hollywood, actually, in West Hollywood. And I was like, 15 and a half, I don't know.
That's so fascinating. I think that's fascinating because I was 16 when I first saw it in Philadelphia. And for me, it was revolutionary. And to the point where later on in life, my sister and I created an event called Rocky Horror Fest, where we put a live band together and we got dressed up in the outfits from the show and we performed all the songs live. This was in my 40s.
That's so cool.
Yeah, but it just had a really big impact in my life. But I think it's interesting that when you
I
saw
went many times back then,
that's
and
neat.
Learned like the whole pantomime.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. And you said it was so, you realized that sexuality in America was so different than the old world. How do you mean that? I'm curious. What was so different when you were, at that young, impressionable age?
Well, there was a very strong feminist culture, at least where I was, which was, first LA the first year, and then I moved to New York City, and I was in the West Village and then the East Village. So, I kind of, lived in I don't know about Heartland, but feminism at that time among our generation was taken for granted. I found out later when I became a mom, single mom, that was not the case. But at the time, for a good couple of decades, I thought that the pill had been invented, and even though kind of AIDS started creeping in, it wasn't affecting so much female sexuality. There was a whole movement of being a lesbian as a political statement, but not necessarily a sexual choice. There was already a conversation about gender being a social construct, and there was definitely a totally different view of our possibilities as women, in the sexual realm. I didn't feel that, when I left Greece, I didn't know anything about the clitoris, and I didn't know I had a clitoris. I didn't know anything about the different types of orgasm. I didn't know anything about squirting. I just didn't know. There were no words for any of these things. And I, caught up here. And, even masturbation, which, I had been doing, but there was no literature on it, right? So, reading Betty Dobson, she's so cool, all that, I kind of was exposed to both the kind of spiritual aspect of sexuality, Tantra and all of that, and the world of, kink is reclaiming your power.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, New York was full of I guess I would call them now woke dungeons,
I love that. Yeah. So you've been, to New York. I love that you mentioned Betty Dodson. I got the opportunity to meet her. Did you ever get the chance to meet her?
No, I don't know. Maybe in a talk or something, but not in one-on-one conversation.
Right. That's so neat. Yeah. And I love how you said the idea of, kink is reclaiming your power. So yeah, I love the journey that you've been on. It just sounds fascinating. And how you described how so much of it you didn't have the words for it. You were just kind of learning it as you went and getting the lexicon for it. And I love how that's brought you to where you are now. When you were on that journey of discovery and kind of reclaiming your power, and I really appreciate how you said you also didn't want to become your mother, what would you say are some of the challenges that you had along the way of you really living your most authentic life to get you to where you are now?
The challenges have always been financial, because I feel that I've been clear as to what I don't want to be. It's very clear to me when female sexuality or all gender sexuality is objectified, over monetized, and split into parts, fractured, so that the sexual being has no access to the body, really, but uses the body. Let's say the I, the person, ends up using the body as if it's not the I. So my understanding of things has been pretty authentic throughout. The challenge has been, particularly when I get rewarded, when I get perks, and then that's always a moment of difficulty, because I need to live, and I definitely don't want to depend on a partner financially, which is another aspect of this conversation. But I don't like the fact that I have to compromise no matter what. It doesn't matter, there's always a compromise in one's truth in order to like fit in and get, rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the challenge has been that, being in the conversation, but also being in the periphery, not being kind of like co-opted, and, including sexuality in the conversation, in my work, in a way that stays within what society calls respectable. And again, that's easier said now, right, than done.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would get much more respect as a university professor, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a, screwed up hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, those are the challenges.
I thank you for sharing that. I think that's definitely an interesting perspective from your point of view that I don't think I've gotten here on my show before. So I love everything that you shared there. And it sounds like you've very defiantly been living an authentic life most of your life. You've just kind of been blossoming into who you are, the way you described it. And it sounds to me like you've been very sure about who you are.
Yeah, but also like I've been an escape artist. So like, if I were to define what I have done, that's it.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. Yeah, and I love how you use the phrase that you didn't want to compromise your truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so important for people to hear, because I think there are a lot of people that feel they have to, or they need to, or they're doing what they think other people say they're supposed to be doing. And it seems like you've just been very defiantly independent, and just honoring who you are. But yet you've also known, there's certain things that maybe you wanted to do, like becoming an academic, and garnering respect that way, that was still you honoring your truth and doing something where maybe it would open a door for you. It's kind of how, is that how it worked for you?
Yeah, I'm going to say that, I have just found that the moment that you say, yes, this is my career path, and you do something well, a couple of years down the line, you're expected to, follow some sort of, programming that I call the, patriarchy. And by patriarchy, I just want to be clear: the patriarchy is the rule of the patriarch. The like the father of the tribe. It has nothing to do with gender. So the idea that like this has to do with like men or individual men is ridiculous and divisive. They're equally, oppressed, if not in some ways more oppressed. So, but yeah, I just have felt that, sooner or later, in order to proceed, I have to compromise. And, again, before I became a mom, it was easier to just say no and start over.
Mm-hmm.
And afterward, it's been more of a challenge, just practically speaking, because my expenses quadrupled. And I also needed to create stability for my daughter. So, yeah, but that has been another great lesson. The lesson of motherhood has been extraordinary.
That's
and,
amazing.
And the realization that, motherhood is the one labor that doesn't get paid.
Yeah, it's partly who you become or who you are when that happens. But yeah, it's I love how you said that.
We don't get paid for it. It's the hardest thing, I've written all these books. I've done, I've made like huge tapestries. I've had museum exhibits. I've done a few things. There's nothing that compares to the work of like being there every day, raising a child, and especially consciously, nothing. And yet that doesn't even go in my title. And definitely, I have not ever been paid by anyone for it. And, I've had to, support it all from other sources of income, which just seems like, one of the most basic ways that the system is hacked.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a journey. That's an amazing perspective of putting it alongside all of the incredible things that you've done with your life and the titles and the respect that you've gotten. And then alongside motherhood, which is extraordinary, but it's not a quote unquote living, right? It's
yeah.
but your expenses quadrupled. Yeah. It's like,
yeah.
Well, I'd love to have you share with us a little bit more about where you are now on your journey. Like, what do you, like we can dive into some of your work. Like, what are you most excited about? What really brings you joy and where do you express your passion?
Well, these conversations bring me a lot of joy.
Thank you.
Speaking with my sisters brings me joy. The way that there is definitely a kind of renaissance in sexology studies, coaching, and talking, and it brings me joy. I started the podcast inspired by Me Too to kind of add to that conversation. I learned a lot in the process. I, had a book contract at the time, and I didn't meet it. I spent like 2 more years on that book because I learned so much basically on the ground, and it changed everything that I was thinking at the time, or thinking about my society at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I am pretty much done with the writing of the book. So that's one of the things that I've been working on. Is my next nonfiction book about sex in America in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm.
I have been very interested in the process of like speaking, right, instead of just having, and how some people find it easier to have sex than talk about sex, speak about sex, right, and negotiate it and actually speak it, not flirt, not like brag or gloat or whatever, but speak it. And so the podcast, it's definitely a labor of love. And other than that, I'm almost done with 2 books, in fact. So that, the book about sexuality and another book that's kind of includes the 2 minutes we spent on motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
So, it includes kinds of, solutions, practical solutions for the, 21st century humanity.
Wow, you are one busy woman. That's incredible. You've accomplished so much in your life, including motherhood, on top of all of these other amazing things.
She's 20.
She's 20? Wow, that's amazing. So cool.
She's studying for the LSATs to be a lawyer.
That's so neat. That's awesome. Yeah, congratulations.
Yeah.
What would you say you would describe as maybe the most rewarding aspect of you living your most authentic life and being able to be who you are? And I know that, your podcast Speak Sex and all that. Like, what would you say is the most rewarding aspect of just being you, who you are today?
I don't have an answer.
I mean, to me, like just talking to you, it just, and just the flow of the conversation, it just seems so liberating. Like so many people, I think, don't seem to know who they are or what they want, and I think from just talking to you, it just seems like you've been very clear on the direction that you want to go. And even if you had to bob and weave to get there, you've really just stood up and said, hey, this is me. That's kind of what I'm getting from this conversation. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. Yeah. You're right about that. I have definitely been told by, I'm going to say like maybe hundreds of people in my life, because I worked as a journalist for Spin magazine as a staff writer for many years, and I would go out and interview people about their sex lives also. So I would say that through all the decades, pretty much that's a line I've heard consistently, that I am, I'm very liberating, that I, bring some sense of freedom
That's beautiful.
So that's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a good reward. Thank you.
That is good. You're welcome. Yeah. Well, and I think by you living free and liberated, you're giving other people permission to do the same, kind of like, hey, if I can do this, so can you, if I can talk about sex out loud, so can you,
Out loud. Yeah. And no judgment and no kind of like, extracurricular assumptions or it's even like in the emotion, like the openness of the emotional openness, I feel that there is so much space we can open for each other if we understand that we're all flawed beings in need of each other, and in need of mercy.
That's beautiful. I love how you said that. We're all flawed beings in need of mercy. Because I think we forget that so much, especially in today's world, like people get caught up in perfectionism and keeping up with the Joneses. So I love you bringing the humanity to that. That's really beautiful. I love that. Well, anything before we go into, is there any question I haven't asked you before I take you into the lightning round that maybe you'd like to talk about?
No.
Thank you. Okay, well then let me just take you. I have a fun lightning round. That's just a series of quick questions. So the first question in the lightning round is, what's maybe the best thing that you feel you've done along your journey to get to where you are today that really helped you?
Have a daughter, have a kid.
Have a kid?
Yeah, for sure. That was the most revolutionary thing for me because I didn't plan to. No one ever expected me to. I didn't have any friends who had children. I really wasn't even aware of them. Like, I knew they existed, but, I lived in such a grown adult world. And it was the most life-changing, revolutionary decision because I got pregnant unexpectedly to have to keep my child and raise her. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, especially since it happened unexpectedly and people didn't expect you to do that. So, yeah.
No.
You kept an open mind and you were like, I'm fearless. I'm going for it. I love that.
Yeah. And, people who think about, overthink things, I didn't have a space or home or like, a plan or money. I literally like went with my purse to give birth in a jacuzzi with a midwife,
Wow.
And had no clue. Like I didn't bring an outfit. I didn't.
That's hilarious. Like, I'm here. What do we do now? I'm feeling pretty large. I think something's supposed to happen. That's amazing. Very cool. How about to anyone maybe who's struggling with living their most authentic life, whatever that is, what advice would you maybe give them?
That they're going to keep changing. They're going to keep changing, and that's the most important advice, I feel, because we live in a moment of like such crazy identity politics. And it's like, however hard you think it is to like, go ahead and do what you imagine or fantasize or want. Actually, it's just like a process. It's just like a step on the way. You're not going to transform into someone else and then be stuck in that road. So, to just go with the flow, to like find the flow of life, which is greater than us individually, and, enjoying it.
It's beautiful.
Life. Yeah.
Yeah. Dance with it. I love that. Just, go with the flow of it all. It's beautiful. Yeah. I think so many people kind of resist that we evolve and we change so much, and that sometimes causes some of their suffering. So I love just leaning into it as part of your piece of advice. How about, is there a book, movie, or resource that you can recommend that maybe helped you along your journey to living your best and most authentic life?
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
It's too simple.
What was that?
That would be too simple. I mean, I have to recommend way too many of each. Yeah.
No worries. And then lastly, for fun, is there a particular song or style of music that really moves you or inspires you?
Again, no, it's seasonal, so I pretty much vibe with different sounds, and then I kind of grow out of that, and I'm done with it for a long ass time, and I go into something else. And I, I'm not particular to anyone. I love new stuff, so I always love most what I haven't heard before, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
beautiful. That's awesome. So I just want to thank you again for taking time out
Thank
of
you so much. Thank
your
you.
busy
This is
schedule.
beautiful.
Thank you to do this. And so where can our listeners find more about you and your work? What's your website?
So wherever they're hearing your podcast right now, all they have to do is just go into the search and put in Speak Sex with Eve, and it will pop up. And if they want to subscribe, that'd be great. It's free. We have hour-long weekly content, and it's all kinds of conversations. So even though it says Speak Sex, I really mean it as Speak Life, but in a way that is sex aware, doesn't exclude sex. So it's speaksexpodcast.com for the website. We're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, we are on Apple, wherever it is. And then my work is in my own website, which is like my artwork, and I have some merchandise. And my name again is Eurydice, EURYDICE, so .net. But thank you so much for all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your time. It's lovely getting to know you. You have beautiful hair. I love it.
Too.
Yeah, thank you.
If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.